We will be doing 3 different blocks this month, and rather than showing you all the fabric at once, I'm going to show it as we get to each block. So our first block is the Bachelor's Puzzle, and in your kit for this block you have this off-white rectangle, you have a black square, the pattern says you have a gray rectangle, you do not, you have a tan one instead. And then we have a green, this is our orange, this is our blue, this is our red rectangle. This group of 4 is folded together in your kit. You will have another group of rectangles that are all red, and they'll be folded together separately. The first piece we're going to cut is our white rectangle. And we're going to cut it into 16 1 3/4 by 2.5 inch rectangles. So if I add those measurements up, if I do a 4x4 grid like it shows in your pattern, that gives me a 7 by 10 rectangle to start. So that's what I'm going to cut. Now, if it makes you nervous cutting all of these at once, you could mark that grid on the wrong side of your fabric, double check your measurements, and then cut it if you want to, but that just adds a little more time to it. So 1 3/4 times 4 is 7 inches, and 2.5 times 4 is 10. So I have my 7-inch mark on the long edge, my 10-inch on the short edge. Cut, cut. And now it's up to you whether you do the 1 3/4 direction going this way, or the 2.5 direction going this way. I'm going to do the 1 3/4 direction, so 7 minus 1 3/4 is 5 1/4. And I will cut once I'm happy with where I am. Actually, I don't need the width. I would rather use a narrower ruler because I can get my fingers off the edge to stabilize it. And then 5 1/4 minus 1 3/4 is 3 1/2. That's only 2 1/2. Double check. I almost messed that whole piece up. 3 1/2. Back off to 1 3/4 is my last cut. If I didn't move these strips as I cut them, and I'm careful, then I can just rotate my mat and then cut the 2.5 inch sections. If they did move, then cut them 1 strip at a time. So I'm doing 2.5 inch sections. 10 minus 2.5 is 7 1/2, so I have my 7 1/2 lined up on a short edge and any straight line on my long edge. 7 1/2, double check. Cut, and then 7 1/2 minus 2 1/2 is 5, and again I want a line on my long edges, and then I can back off to my 2.5 inch mark. And I'm always keeping my measurements here, but I'm keeping a line on the edges here to keep everything straight. So that gives me 16 rectangles that size. For our piece that the pattern is calling gray, we are using this light tan, and from this we need 4 rectangles. They are going to be 1 1/2 inches wide, and the pattern says by 4 1/4 inches long. That's a mistake. They really should be 4 inches. If you cut them at 4 1/4, it's not the end of the world because you can always trim them down later, but I'm going to go ahead and cut them at 4 inches long. So I want 4 inches this way, and 1 1/2 times 3 is 6 inches. So I'm going to get the straight edge, or as I call it, clean cut, 2 edges. Rotate either the piece of fabric or your mat, and I want 4 inches by 6 inches, and when you're satisfied that you've got it, now 6 minus 1 1/2 Boy, good thing this was a 12-inch ruler. 6 minus 1.5 is 4.5. So I want my 4.5-inch mark on my short edge, and then any straight line on my long edges. When you've got it, cut. 4.5 minus 1.5 is 3. So I just back the ruler up, cut, and my last cut is at 1.5. And cut. My black square, I'm going to cut down to a 1.5-inch square. So I just want to line it up, clean up 2 edges, rotate, and 1.5. And cut. My 4 colored rectangles are all going to be cut exactly the same size. So I'm cutting mine all at once. If that bothers you, don't do it. Cut them one at a time. We need 1 3-inch square and 1 1 3/4-inch square. So I have mine all stacked up, and when I stack them, I try to get 2 edges fairly well lined up. So I'm going to cut, and if you're cutting through multiple layers, you will need a sharp blade. I am going to rotate my mat. Since I have a whole stack here, I don't want to get them out of alignment. And now my first square is 3 inches, so I'm going to go ahead and cut 3 inches off of here. That's my biggest one. I'm going to very carefully move those out of the way and back my ruler up so that I can cut the other side down to 3 inches. So there's my 4 3-inch squares right there. And my last one is 1 3/4. So this time I don't have to move anything out of the way because it doesn't matter if I cut beyond the ruler. Line everything up to 1 3/4, cut and cut. And that gives me my 4 1 3/4-inch squares. I should have done this before I moved the 3-inch squares. I was not paying enough attention to the pattern. Our 3-inch square, we're going to cut in half on the diagonal twice. So point to point. And if I don't move it, if you do move it, you will have to reline up and point to point again. We will be trimming these down a little bit later, so if you're slightly off, and I do mean slightly, it's not the end of the world. We're going to divide our colored triangles into pairs, and we're going to put one of our white rectangles in between each one. I want to line up one edge. I want my straight edge of my triangle lined up with my straight edge of my white rectangle, and the same on the other side. I want to continue on. So when I'm sewing, I'm going to sew from this end, the end that I want lined up, whether that means the triangle's on top or the rectangle, whatever it takes to get that to be where I start. Because if I start from this end, I may get them off, probably not that much, but I'm going to sew all of them. So you will have 8 of these units, 2 in each color. I've pieced all of my triangles onto the opposite sides of our white rectangle, and we press toward our colored triangle. The next step is to take our remaining white rectangles, and we are going to have 2 of those for each and our 1 colored square, and sew them together like this. So you'll have 4 different colors in the middle and 4 sets of these. So there's my centerpiece is pieced, and we press in toward the colored square in the middle. And the next step is going to be to put these guys together. It's going to be like this and like this. So when we're sewing, we are matching up our intersections here. We do have them pressed in opposite directions, so they should nest. So again, we're not worried about this coming all the way out to the edge. I do sew from the edge of that piece all the way in. And it doesn't really matter which one's on top. You just want to make sure that those intersections stay. So pin if you feel the need. So here are the four colored units sewn together. You're going to press away from the center for the last two seams. And now we need to trim this down. We are going to trim it down to 4 inches square. So half of 4 inches is 2 inches. So I want my 2-inch mark on my ruler running vertically through the points through the center and horizontally through the points going through the center. That'll keep my block squared up as best possible. When you think you've got it, we're going to trim 2 edges, then rotate the block. And this time I'm going to line up my 4-inch mark with the 2 sides I already cut. And if you were accurate the first time, 2-inch marks should still be going through your center. Trim and trim. So we didn't have a lot of extra on those triangles, but there was a hair. So we're going to trim all 4 of them so they look like that. Now we're ready to put the whole block together. You can put your colored blocks in any corner you want, so arrange them till you're happy with them. Once you have that, then we are going to sew one of the pattern says gray strips, we're using tan strips, between 2 of our colored squares, and that's 2 rows. And then for the center, we're going to sew our other 2 tan strips to our black square. My rows are sewn together, and I pressed the top and bottom one in toward the tan strip, and then the middle one is pressed out also toward the tan strips. So the last step is just to sew the rows together, and these seams should be matching here. Since they're pressed opposite directions, they should just nest together. There's the finished bachelor's puzzle. For my last seams, I pressed them in toward the center because there are fewer intersections there. Just a little side note, if you happen to look up the block bachelor's puzzle, there are several different blocks that have been given that name. This just happens to be one of them. Our second block this month is the Whirling Whirlwind, and happily there are only 3 fabrics in this block. We have a green strip, and we have a beige and a blue square. Our green strip, we need to cut 2 4 3/4 inch squares. So 4 3/4 times 2 is 9.5. So first off, I'm going to straighten my 2 edges, and be aware, some of you may have gotten selvages. You should have plenty of fabric because it's bigger than your 10 inches, because I did width the fabric and then just cut it into 4 pieces. So we want it to be 4 3/4 wide, and we want to go 9.5 is going to be on our short end, and there's my selvage right there. And I'm going to cut. And then just back my ruler up to the 4 3/4 mark. And as always, I have lines running along my long edge to keep everything straight. We're going to trim our beige square and our blue square down also to 4 3/4 inches. I'm going to do both of mine at the same time, so I'm stacking them up. Cut 2 edges to make them straight. And since they're stacked, I'm going to pick up my cutting mat instead of picking up the squares. And it's 4 3/4. So I'm going to line it up here and here. Cut. And then we're going to cut those squares into 4 triangles. So I'm going to leave them stacked, and I'm cutting point to point. If you're careful and don't move it, then you should be able to just flip your ruler over and cut point to point the other direction as well. So that gives me my 4 triangles of each. We're going to pair up all those beige and blue triangles, and it should be like this. My long edge should not be the one I'm sewing together, nor should it be on the bottom. I do want my blue to always be on the right side, but when I'm sewing, I will flip it over and I will sew with the beige on top, because I have my straight edge there, so I'm not going to be sucking that point down into my feed dogs. So we're going to make 4 sets of these. Here are my units sewn together. I did press toward the blue. Now be careful when you're both sewing these and pressing them, because both short sides are on the bias. So this is still bias here, and you could stretch it out pretty easily. The next thing we're going to do is take our green squares, and we're going to put the pieces we just made, matching the outside edges like this. And this one is new to me, so see, even I'm learning something new. Then we're going to take it to the sewing machine, and we're going to sew 1/4 of an inch away from this piece on both sides. So the gap is supposed to do there, and we're going to make 2 sets of these, so both green squares and all 4 of these guys. Okay, I've stitched my 1/4 of an inch in from my edge, and now I'm going to just come in and trim 1/4 of an inch from my stitching line, which should be right along the line, the edge of the blue and the beige triangle. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, and then repeat on the other square. And then I am going to press toward the green, so because there aren't any seams over there, so there won't be as much bulk pressing that way. I have 4 of these now, and we're going to trim them down to 3.5 inches. Half of 3.5 is 1 3/4. So I want to line my 1 3/4 mark up with my center point here, and I should have 1 3/4 running through this way as well. And really my 45-degree line should be running parallel to that line. So what if, turn it this way, I can see it a little bit better now. It's running right here. So our goal is to keep that center point in the center. And it might be easier said than done. I think I'm good there. This looks fairly parallel. I'm running on a 3.5 inch mark here, 3.5, well, nope, 3 3/4, 3 3/4 here. Yours may not be that same measurement, but I know that it's fairly straight based on the other 2 sides. Now once I have cut that, now I'm going to use my 3.5 inch mark to finish it off. So I'm lining it up here and here, and cutting. So I'm going to do that to all 4 of those. The last one I cut with a long ruler. I switched over to a square ruler, and now this makes life easier because I can put my 1 3/4 mark here, and my 45-degree line can run along the seam there. So this is one time that it could be very useful to have a square ruler with that 45-degree line running through it. So now I'm going to go to 3.5. You can get by without it, but it'll just be easier with it. It doesn't have to be as big as the one I'm using either. A 6-inch one would be plenty big enough. So let me just do one more. Although you could just rewind the video. Putting my 1 3/4 mark there in the center. My 45-degree line is on my seam. So it's much easier with your square ruler. 3.5 here and here now, and my 45 is still on my seam. Now we're ready to arrange the block and sew it together. My blue and green points are coming together in the center. You will need to lay it out to make sure you're getting it going the right direction. So I'm sewing green to blue, green to blue. And if I were to rotate these, they're exactly the same. So I can stack them up together at my sewing machine. Flip this one on top of this one. And my seams are both pressed toward the green, so they're going in opposite directions, so they will nest next to each other to help keep everything straight. And so my 1/4 inch seam. Here are my 2 rows, and that's how I sewed them on the machine, so they were going the same direction. I pressed toward the green, and now if I just take one of these and flip them around, I have my pinwheel design again. Since I pressed toward the green, my seams are going in opposite directions. My spot to match is this point to this point. Okay, I've sewn the 2 rows together and I'm ready to press. I have shown you this trick before, but I'm going to do it again. I can pop that center seam because this really is a 4 patch. There's one, there, and there. So I'm going to twist my seam allowance. It will only work one direction. If I go the wrong direction, it just folds over on itself. If I go the other direction, it will pull out a couple of stitches and it will give me a little tiny pinwheel there in the middle. And then my seams will be pressed that way, and this one will be pressed this way so that they rotate around and I have less bulk in my center. Here's my block pressed. So that is our finished Whirling Whirlwind block. I thought this one was pretty easy, other than making sure you keep everything straight when you're trimming down your units. Our 3rd block this month is the X block. The pieces that are listed in the pattern are a gray square, and that is this square. I would say it actually reads a little bit more brown, but that's the one we're using. And then you have 4 beige strips that are about 2 by 5 inches, and you have 4 red strips that are about 3 by 6 inches. The gray or brown square, in our case, we're going to trim down to 1 3/4 inches square. And you do have a little bit of extra fabric, so you can kind of play with what's going to be sort of centered on it if you want to, or you can just cut it. So clean cut 2 edges, rotate, and line my 1 3/4 mark up on both the sides that I just trimmed. And mine's not going to be as centered as I would like, so I'm going to cut mine again. Still not going to be exactly what I'm visualizing, but what I was kind of trying to do was center all those diamonds. You don't have to, I'm just playing. Our beige strips we're trimming down to 1 3/4 inches wide by 4 3/4 inches long. I have mine all stacked up. If you're uncomfortable doing that, do it one at a time, but I'm going to cut mine all at once. So I'm going to clean cut 2 edges, and then I'm going to rotate my mat, not my pieces. And it's 1 3/4 wide, so I'm lining the 1 3/4 mark up on the long side by 4 3/4 long. So my 4 3/4 is down here, and trim, and that's my 4 beige rectangles. From our rectangles, we're going to cut a triangle, and this is a little bit different. Pattern doesn't really tell you how to do it. I do have all 4 of mine stacked up again. You do not have to do that if you're more comfortable cutting them one at a time. I'm just clean cutting the long edge on this, and I am very carefully rotating, although they are going to be trimmed down later. And then our triangle, the pattern says you want the 2 sides to be the same and to measure at least 4 1/8 to 4 1/4, somewhere around there. So what I'm doing is I am positioning a square ruler onto these. So I could mark my center mark, but I didn't. This is what I'm doing. I am lining up the same measurement on both ends, so I have 4.5 hitting my long edge, and that's how I'm going to do it. Cut, cut, and it's these triangles that we want, so I have 4 red triangles. This block is going to go together pretty much the same way 1/4 of our Bachelor puzzle did. So my first thing I'm going to do is sew my gray or brown square between 2 of the beige strips. I've sewn the center square between 2 beige strips, and it gets pressed in toward the center. My next step is to take the red triangles, and then we're going to put a beige strip between them, and that should look very familiar. When I'm sewing, I'm lining up this edge with the bottom of the beige strip, and we'll make 2 of these. This is one I've already stitched, and after you finish stitching, we are going to press out away from the center towards our red triangles. Once you've made your 2 red sections, we're ready to put our rows together. They are on point rows. So my seams in the center were pressed in toward the center, and out here they're pressed out. So we're going to be matching these seams, and they should nest since they're going in opposite directions. My block is sewn together. I pressed the last 2 seams away from the center, so toward the red. And we're going to trim this down just like we did our little pieces in the Bachelor puzzle. The finished size, or the cut size on this block should be 6.5 inches. So half of 6.5 is 3.25. So I'm going to put my 3.25 mark right in the center. So I have it running both this way through those points in my brownish or grayish square, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to center it as best I can, and then we are going to trim. So 3.25, just double check that. Cut, cut. Then I'm going to rotate my block and line up the 6.5 inch mark on those 2 sides I just cut. My 3.25 should still be going through the centers. And that's our finished block.